Hey everyone, my name is Jenny Goforth, and we're going to just go ahead and get started with the workshop. I appreciate everyone attending today, and I am recording this. If you are interested in getting a copy of the recording, I think I'm going to post it on our webpage. Possibly, I could probably email it to participants, as I think I have your email addresses, but that way, in case you wanted to review anything, you would have access to that. So welcome. I am the program director for the Pollinator Stewardship Council, and I also work at a university, a land-grant university in the West Coast. So lots of experience with food systems and growing food. Um, I'm a master gardener. I teach a ton of classes on gardening and producing food and that kind of thing through the university system. And then also, personally, I have an organic farm. I've been on this piece of land for 25 years, or maybe actually a little longer than that now, and do lots of different types of organic gardening. And we really focus on regenerative, no-till um, uh, production these days. And one thing that I think is also kind of unique about my experience is that our farm doesn't really grow food for money. We do other things for an income, and we use our farming endeavors to sort of increase food access. We believe food is a human right. And so one of the biggest programs that we have is a seed distribution project. So we grow, package, and distribute about 10,000 packages of seed, organic seed, every year. We distribute them at no charge to food banks and schools and tribal communities and all kinds of different groups of folks. And we do that, with this idea of increasing food access, and also because, like a lot of folks, we've noticed, that there's been a big insect and pollinator decline over the years. And so that's one of the things that's really nice, is to be able to have all of these seeds in production. We're also increasing habitat for pollinators. And then kind of on a personally, selfish note, we also have lots of different types of like perennial foods that are growing here. So when we increase our pollinator production, our pollinator gardening efforts, then we get, more yield on things like, blueberries or different fruit trees and that kind of stuff. So let me take a look really quick here. I'm just going to make sure I'm going to mute everybody here. Okay, awesome. So what I'd love to do is we'll go ahead and go through this slide deck. And what I would love is if at the while I'm doing the presentation, if folks could just put any questions that you might have into the chat, that would be super helpful. I don't want to lose any questions. Don't worry if you're concerned they might get answered during the presentation. Just want to make sure everything gets captured. And I'll just say that I'm cramming about 8 hours worth of uh, formatting into like less than about an hour. So normally, when I'm teaching a gardening class, this is anywhere from 4 to 9 hours worth of presentation for backyard gardening, right? Integrated pest management is something I usually do that's a 90-minute class. Then this is again at a very, very beginning level. And then, talking about pollinators and why it's important to support them, that's again something that's usually an hour to 2 hours long. So this is really going to kind of hit the highlights. There might be a lot of questions, and so I may not be able to cover everything in this class, but at least it will give you kind of an overview and hopefully give you some ideas on how to find information to follow up. So we'll start off by talking about the impact of pesticides on pollinators, and we'll kind of go through that a little bit because we want to kind of know why it's important or how they might be affecting pollinators. And then we'll talk about some gardening techniques for pollinators. We'll have to select different things, different, strategies like polyculture or seed production, that kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit about integrated pest management for the backyard gardener. Again, these are all just like very brief topics. And then we'll wrap it up by just explaining about this organization a little bit and what we do. And that's going to be a pretty small segment at the end. So Let's see here. Hopefully I will have enough time to get through. I kind of redid this workshop. And so actually, let me go ahead and do something that might be kind of helpful. I'm going to put captions on and hopefully, great. Hopefully that will help folks in case there's any problem with my audio. So what we're going to look at is we'll start by talking about why pollinators are impacted, why and how by pesticides, and why is it important to garden with pollinators in mind. For some folks, they may be really familiar with this topic, and some folks not so much. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, if just if you're a beekeeper or a gardener, just any kind of quick information about what experience you might have, that might be helpful, and we can kind of come back to that in a minute. Let's see here. So moving on to why is pollinator protection important? So this was actually not last year, I think it was the year prior, but it was very similar last year, that beekeepers lost an average of 48% in their hives. And let's see here. There we go, sorry. Oops. And so, this is an average, right? So for beekeepers that are working in pesticide intensive areas, right, like big, huge blocks of conventional farming, acres, the losses have run much higher, 70 to 95% in some areas. There are some states that commercial beekeepers really just don't keep bees anymore. I have heard that Nebraska is one state that is really, really, you know, uh, nearly impossible to keep a large quantity of bees because there are so many pesticides in the area that from a commercial beekeeper standpoint, it, it, it they have so much loss that it's just impossible to sort of continue on that way. So it is, this is different than it was, with beekeeping 100 years ago. It's different than it was 30 years ago. So let's look at some ways that happens. So how do pesticides impact pollinators? And I'll be honest, before I started working with the Pollinators Stewardship Council, I was really involved in growing food and thought I had a pretty good understanding of environmental stewardship and that kind of thing. And I have learned an enormous amount in the last few years working with this organization, because I think I really didn't quite understand how pesticides impacted pollinators. I mean, I think I was imagining, like a lot of people, an acute kill, right? Like lethal. So there's a lot of pesticides that are acutely toxic to bees and other pollinators. And I was imagining this: someone sprays and then the bees die or the butterflies die or something, right? But actually, most of the issues come with sublethal exposure. So these are pesticide levels that don't kill bees at like a significant rate, but they have an effect on their performance. So this happens a variety of ways. So one of the ways is that it can affect their ability to like forage or to communicate with each other. One of the scientific advisory panel members, Dr. James Naya, he for the Pollinator Stewardship Council, he has a paper on how how pesticides impact the bees' wiggle dance and how this wiggle dance is how they communicate, and so their behavior is totally changed in the hive. So they're no longer able to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing, and then they often can starve or they can have some sort of issue. So people will keep bees and they have this massive loss rate. And, when they don't die immediately because of a spray, I think oftentimes the sublethal is really overlooked because you can't tell that oftentimes without testing, right? Like you have no idea. Your bees are just doing weird things. They're slowly declining. You have a hive that just isn't robust, The other thing that can happen is synergistic effects, right? So pesticides can have more toxic effects in combination than alone. And a lot of times the registration process, which we'll talk about that just really briefly, but often do not have to consider that, right? So farmers may apply multiple pesticides at the same time because it is a combination that they find useful for their food production, but is much, much, much more toxic to bees when those are combined. One thing is food availability. So dicamba, we see this with dicamba. This is we have herbicides that are used in fields, along right-of-ways and forests. So when they use something like dicamba, which is sort of like, for folks who don't know, kind of a different version of um, like Roundup or something, where they have dicamba resistant uh, crops that have been developed, like genetically modified seeds, and then they spray this dicamba product on, and only the certain crops can survive that. So what happens is there's a drift, and it reduces the flowering plants in the nearby area. Actually, there's with dicamba in particular, it's interesting because there's an enormous number of like litigation around the use of dicamba, and it's mostly from farmers who have been impacted by their neighbors using this. So it drifts and it affects their crops, or their crop dies. But this when drift happens like this, it reduces the amount of food available for native pollinators, makes their survival more difficult. It also, we're talking about pollinators, but really all of these things also go all the way up the food chain, right? And we see birds and frogs and fish and certainly humans. All these things are sort of affected by pesticides. And I wanted to talk just really briefly about a one class of pesticides. I mean, there's so many different chemicals on there that can affect, pollinators, but we'll just talk about this kind of briefly. So neonics target the central nervous system of insects, and they have both acute and sublethal effects on bees. And so, obviously, if something is a neonic is sprayed and an acute kill happens and bees all die, that's really obvious. But not so obvious is they have an increased susceptibility to disease. They have limited reproductive rates. That changes their ability to forage, so they can starve because they don't, because they've had that reduction. Decreased learning abilities. So all of these things, what happens is it weakens the hive over time. We also say things like varroa mite, right, which we know is just like somewhat new, like some generations ago wasn't a thing here, but we see now varroa mite is this, really huge thing that impacts bees. But there are many studies that show that in situations where bees are not exposed to certain classes of pesticides, they're able to sort of fight off varroa in a way that that these compromised bees are not. So it all kind of lumps together, right? And neonics in particular are a class that are pretty challenging for pollinators. One of the main reasons they're so challenging is these massive quantities. So millions of pounds of the chemical are applied to, on average, about 140 commercial crops every year. One thing that I think is kind of interesting is that seed coatings. So I have another slide about this in a second, but in the US, nearly all field planted corn and 2/3 of soybean use neonic coated seeds. And they actually, that application is not tracked or regulated, and I'll talk about that in a second. But this is they're coated with the seed, and the idea initially was that could be a cool thing. It could reduce drift, right? Instead of the farmer spraying it all over the field, they'll coat the seed with it. But what they weren't really anticipating is the contamination, right? The soil, the chemical is neonics are a systemic chemical, and so they go through the whole plant tissue, right? So the chemical is then found in soil samples from coast to coast, in waterways, drinking water, because not only does it then, kind of go into the soil and run off and all that kind of thing, but also it's in the entire plant's tissue. So when a bee or a butterfly comes up and lands on a flower from a plant that was grown with this seed coating, then it's being exposed to this neonic, and something that we really wouldn't be able to tell, right? Like this is something that's kind of silently affecting the bees. And it's been this massive impact, 48 times more toxic landscape in the US to insects since the 1990s. And this was really quite a bit because of the rising application of neonics. They're a relatively newer chemical, and one really interesting thing about neonics is that Europe banned them. They, saw all of this problem with the application and use of them, and I think it was 2014 they banned neonics, and they still produce lots of food, their insect populations are improved and all kinds of stuff. So they aren't they've been shown not to be like critical to food production, because there really was not a drop in food production in Europe, and I believe Canada also has been banning them. Okay, let's see here. I just wanted to show this. This is something that we usually offer when we're talking to a beekeeping club, but I thought this was kind of a neat slide showing how systemic pesticides are designed. It's not just like something that happens, but they're actually designed to kill at this sublethal exposure levels. So here's a product made by Bayer that contains imidacloprid. So this is one of the chemicals in the neonic class. So this was to kill termites, and termites are social insects like bees, right? So they work as interdependent units. They all rely on each other for survival. So what this product does is not just kill the termites, it interferes with their instinctive social behavior. So what happens is it causes them to become disassociated and cease their natural grooming behavior. The grooming is important for termites because it helps protect them against soil fungi. And then when termites stop grooming, that naturally occurring fungi in the soil attack and kill the termites. So by applying this product, it makes the fungi 10,000 times more dangerous to termites. And this is from their, this is not something that is unique information or that has been extrapolated. This is like an advertisement for why this product works so well, right? So this is one way that I think a lot of people are just unaware that certain chemicals can have such a massive effect on pollinators. I don't know if you'll be able to see the map here, but one interesting thing is, so this is a map of tracking the application of imidacloprid, that particular one of the particular chemicals within the neonate class. And so this is tracking it from 1994 or something up until we have 2011. Is that right? Yeah. 12, 13, 14, 14. Okay, 94 to 2014. And so you can see it's just increasing and increasing over time, this application. Now, the problem is that after 2014, a lot of that data changed and is no longer available because a lot of things stopped being tracked. If you received the Pollinator Stewardship Council newsletter, we had a couple of recent articles about it, and there was a great win. This whole tracking system was being defunded, and we were no longer going. Scientists and organizations across the U.S. were going to no longer have access to this information at all. And through a lot of advocacy efforts, now they have just found funding for it and will continue to track this really important information. So I mentioned seed treatments before, and this was one thing that was really new information for me when I started working with the Pollinator Stewardship Council. So they aren't counted as a pesticide application. And I think this personally seems a little surprising. So seed treatments fall under a loophole category as a device. So if I was a commercial farmer and I was going to purchase a neonic and I was going to apply it as a spray or something, then theoretically, right, I'd be reporting that on my farm report, or I'd be purchasing it and it would be tracked in some way. And then we would be able to see on that little map at the government website, how much was being applied, how many, pounds or something. But seed treatments are not tracked in that at all. So for products that are regulated as devices, there is no required pre-market review. So unlike pesticides, the FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act does not require registration of devices. So there's no tracking of pesticides as seed treatments. They don't require efficacy data. So there's actually no requirement by the manufacturer to show that they work, or what they do. It's really pretty fascinating. At the very end of this workshop, I have a opportunity for you. That today is a closing time frame for a comments period with the EPA to about this very topic. And so at the very end of the slide, I'll have an option if you feel like weighing in with a in support of pollinators. You have an opportunity to do that today with the EPA. Okay, so that's just an incredibly fast background on why it's important to consider pollinators when we're looking at pesticides, right? And how pesticides can impact pollinators. Again, I think, mostly I'm talking about this from a commercial farming kind of perspective, but we certainly see that in, we can apply that information in our backyard gardening practices also, right? And we'll talk in a few slides about organic pesticides or different ways to tell if something is safe for bees and that kind of thing. So we're going to look at how to select plants, some best practices to support pollinators. So pollinators are super important, right? They're responsible for 1 of every 3 bites of food that we eat. You know, I just puts a bit of information on here, that 75% of global crops benefit from animal pollination to some degree. Now, some crops are wind pollinated or that kind of thing, but even things that, may not rely entirely on pollination from, bees or butterflies or that kind of thing, a lot of them will be improved. Wild bees are the most efficient pollinators of cultivated plants, improving yield, quality, shelf life, and food commercial value. So really our food system, our current modern food system is incredibly dependent on pollinators. You know, I don't have a slide in here about almonds, but again, something that I wasn't really aware of before I started working with this organization about how important managed bees were in almond production. That I believe it's the US produces like 80% of the world's almond crop, and that's grown almost exclusively in this Central California, this small kind of valley. And that basically, commercial beekeepers all move bees into almonds in almond bloom in like January, February kind of time frame. And without those bees, we would not really have an almond crop. And so this is a different system. This was not the way that, almonds were produced. Bees weren't shipped across the country in the past. There's a great movie called The Pollinators. I'll try to put make a note of for myself, and I'll try to put a link to that at the end in the chat. But that movie talks all about this process with almonds in particular, and a bunch of our board members are featured in that documentary. It's really fascinating, but really, really important for the food that we eat. So some strategies. One thing is to plant a variety of flowers. So different flowers attract different pollinators. So it's important to plant a variety of flowers to attract a variety of pollinators. One thing is bees generally, going to collect one type of pollen during a foraging trip. So large clumps of a single species. And the suggestion is 3 square feet. So that's actually not a large space, right? But more, will attract more pollinators. But even a single plant will be found and enjoyed by them, of course. So one of the ways that it can be really easy to do this in a veggie garden is to place flowers at the end of every bed or row. And we do this in our farm. We use polyculture, so we do seed production. So there's tons of flowers happening, but just to ensure and to support bees and pollinators, we have these beds that are 4 feet wide, and in general, depending on where they are in the garden, they range from 25 feet to 60 feet long. And at the beginning and end of every single one, there's a mix of flowering plants that are specifically great for pollinators. And it's a very easy way to support pollinators. And actually, it's great because it makes it really beautiful. I'm someone who really enjoys flowers, but I tend not to plant ornamental gardens. I like plants that you can eat. So this is a way to increase this, and get that beauty that you would have in an ornamental flower garden, but also kind of in a practical application of mixed in with our veggies and things. Another thing that you can do is to water your plants regularly. Pollinators need water to survive, so it's important to water them. There's mixed information about the type of watering that works best for pollinators. Um, you know, I'm sure will notice that when you have a sprinkler on, butterflies and bees and things are not flying through the sprinkler. They're going to avoid, rainy days, that kind of stuff. So one way that you might support them is by using something like drip irrigation. And that would prevent it would allow, I guess, the pollinators to come and visit the plants even when you're irrigating. So that could be a way to help support them. It's also good for a lot of other reasons. A drip irrigation or something similar will water the plants directly where they need it, which is at their roots. You're not wasting water in evaporation as you would if you were overhead watering, that kind of thing. Another way is to mulch your garden. And mulch helps retain moisture in the soil and it provides a habitat for pollinators. So you can use a layer of organic mulch around plants to reduce evaporation. There's a lot of different kinds of organic mulches that you can use. The picture here is some straw. We use leaves. In the wintertime, we use a lot of leaf mulch, and we just cover all of our garden, all of our fields with a leaf mulch, which is really great. You can also leave piles of debris sometimes in gardens, especially for the wintertime for nesting bees. There's I think in general, both of these are good for pollinator support, and we'll take a look at some more information about that in another slide. Now, one thing I would mention is that if you have specific questions about your own gardening practices, right? You're like, okay, mulch, yeah, I want to use mulch, and I'm curious if this type of mulch would be a good idea or whatever. Again, please feel free to put that in the chat. People are attending from different parts of the US. I may not have the answer to your particular microclimate, but I can probably help you find the answer if I don't know it. But it's totally fine to ask things that are really specific to your unique growing conditions, because this is going to be real general here. Okay, so one thing that I think is often overlooked is the option of switching to no-till. So if you're growing perennials, right, plants that come back every single year, you're not tilling. But if you're doing an annual garden or something, you're doing annual food production, most of the time, what people are imagining is, they're planting an in-ground garden and they're using a tiller or some kind of thing. Sometimes people do raised beds and they hand turn it, that kind of thing. So when I'm talking about no-till, I'm really talking about moving away from using like a tiller or a tractor or something to prepare the soil. Now, I knew for a long time that no-till was a good idea in my particular situation with our farm. I could see that in spite of our best efforts, that the soil health was declining over the decades of tilling that we used, and I knew that was probably a good idea to make a switch. It was really challenging on the scale that we have for me to conceive of actually doing it, right? I knew it was the right thing, but it just seemed like this huge endeavor. And I will be honest and say, I I can't believe that we did it sooner. I can't believe I was so nervous about it. It's actually cut down on our labor like massively. It's just been like honestly the best thing ever. Doesn't mean that it was absolutely seamless and everything was perfect, but it was much, much, much easier than I had anticipated. So no-till gardens, some of the benefits, there are no special tools required. So you don't have to rent a tiller or you don't have to own a piece of like machinery. It can make really great use of waste materials. You can see it's also called like lasagna gardening, different things. So you can actually build one directly on top of an existing lawn. So in that situation, you could just put down a thick layer of cardboard, and then we see the little image here. and again, I teach, hours and hours of class instruction just on this method. And so this is such a quick look at it. But so we have the cardboard, and then we have like straw and leaves, and then some food waste, and then some composted manure and straw and leaves, and layer it up, and then topsoil at the top. And so you can see the picture of that in someone's yard, and it's, a raised bed, and it's made from all of these waste materials. Now, if you want to do a no-till method, you can fast track it and do it this season, in which case you would just add that topsoil to the top layer. You can also prepare a bed for eventual use, and you could start this season by starting with those layers. And so you can lay down some cardboard now, and then as you mow your lawn, or as you have, some compost or that kind of thing, you can be adding that to it and stacking it up. And then, in the fall, you're doing your last, cover with some leaves, and then you let it sit for the winter time, and then it'll be ready for you in the spring next year to plant. It's really can be affordable, especially if you do it like that. You build it over the course of the year. It's really great for heavy soils. I think it's also great for sandy soils, because one of the things that's is increasing your soil health and increasing the nutrient access for the plants. And so if you have a really sandy soil, you water, and it just doesn't hold the moisture and doesn't hold nutrients. So you have to fertilize more often and water more often with sandy soil. With clay soil, right, you have the opposite, where it does hold water super well, and it holds nutrients super well, but it's so heavy that roots have a hard time going through and that kind of thing. So this helps improve the soil health, I think, for both. Really beneficial to the soil. It reduces watering because you have all of this mulch kind of built in there. And I think the real takeaway here is it mimics nature. So anytime that we are gardening in a way that mimics nature, I think we're generally on the right path. So if we look at a healthy forest, there's no tilling that happens to the healthy forest. We see all different kinds of plants growing in a healthy forest. And in the life cycle of a healthy forest, we see, like with deciduous, trees, or mixed deciduous and conifers, we see, leaves fall down, and plants grow up, and plants decompose. And if I walk out into I live in the middle of this beautiful forest in the Pacific Northwest, and if I walk outside and I just put my hand in the soil, I can just like dig it up with my hand, right? Like the soil is not heavy. The soil is just like rich and teeming with life, because it has not been tilled. It has all these layers of nutrients. And so when we are doing the no-till, we're really mimicking nature. And this can be a really great thing to support for pollinator support. One thing to note is that we want to think about annuals and perennials, right? So annuals complete their life cycle in one season. Biennials complete their life cycle over 2 growing seasons. So like a biennial would be kale, for example. You might grow kale. We usually grow it as a 1 season as an annual, but if you want it to create seed, we have our kale, and we grow it out through the first year, and we enjoy the kale, and we eat the kale. And then it requires a period of vernalization, requires the winter cold snap to do seed production. So it kind of gets cold in the wintertime, and then in the following spring, in its second growing season, right, it starts producing a flower head, and then the flower head makes the seed. And by the end of the second growing season, you have your seed for those biennials. Now, perennials can grow for many years, and there's all different kinds of perennials. Obviously, like we have things like apple trees and that kind of stuff. There's also perennials that completely die down to the ground every year, and then they come back. Asparagus would be an example of something like that. You want to plant species that bloom in different seasons to extend the enjoyment of the garden. And by different seasons, I'm talking about seasons, but also just like segments of the growing season. And so you want things that bloom every single month, right, for the pollinators. And a variety of flower colors will attract a diverse variety of bees. So bees aren't colorblind, but they have a hard time seeing red. And so that's something to note, is to just like have all of these different colors. Blue, violet, and purple are particularly beneficial because they tend to attract bees in larger numbers. Yellow flowers work really well. So if you have that mix, and again, by planting flowers at the beginning and the end of every bed, that can be a really great way to do that. So saving seeds, this can be another really great way to to support pollinators. And I would really highly, highly stress this. I think people do not save seed um, uh, as much as they can because there's so many types of seed that are very easy to grow. If you're interested in seed saving, I do sometimes teach a workshop specifically to seed saving. It's like a hour and a half workshop through my university, and oftentimes that's free or very low cost. And so if you're interested, let's see, I will just put in my email address at the end and you can contact me and I'll just share that out the next time that I teach a seed saving workshop. So you can easily save seed from different veggies, flowers, and herbs. A really easy way is to begin by collecting seed from an open pollinated annual variety. Open pollinated means that it's going to breed true. It is not a hybrid. You can't really save seeds from hybrids as a backyard gardener. When I teach seed saving workshops, we don't get into how to do plant breeding and all that kind of stuff with F1 hybrids where we have two different parents and then the hybrid is the offspring of these two different parents. So we want to make sure that it is open pollinated, a non-hybrid variety. Because when we save the seed from that, it will it will look the same in subsequent generations. So these annuals, an open pollinated annual makes the seed at the end of the growing cycle, and it's very little processing usually. There's nothing real crazy that you have to do with it. A a bush bean or a pole bean would be a good example of this, where we we have some green beans, we grow them, we pick them, and we eat the green beans, and they're delicious. And maybe we just leave a few plants to make the seed, right? And we just leave them alone at the end of the season. We collect the dry pods. We let them dry nicely and shell them and store the seeds in a cool, dark, dry place, and we can plant them the next year. So here are some pictures of some flowers. Sometimes it can be a little challenging to tell when the seeds are actually mature. If you harvest, I mean, actually, any of this is great for supporting pollinators, right? We really need the blooms for pollinators. And so, in terms of supporting pollinator health, you know, the bloom is going to be the critical part, but if you want the added benefit of being able to collect the seeds, then you want mature seeds because immature seeds are going to have a reduced germination rate. So not all of them will germinate. And so we have some pictures, like at the top is some snapdragons, right, with these beautiful blooms, and then they're immature, they're kind of forming their seeds, and then the mature is at the end. And so that can be a little bit challenging when you're first learning about seed saving, is how to tell those different things because seeds look really different. And so I do have a link at the end to a little publication made by a seed saving organization that might be helpful in helping determine some of that stuff. So another thing that you can do is intercropping, or also known as like polyculture. So this is when more than one species is grown at the same place, time, in proximity as others. And again, this is where we're imitating natural landscape. So if I look out into the forest around my house right now, I look out the window, it looks like a polyculture. There's all different kinds of things growing here, right? And so we try to do this in our garden as much as possible. We interplant all different kinds of things. And it's interesting, like you can really do this in a way that is efficient. It's great for extracting different types of pollinators. So one of the ways that we do this is, the flowers at the beginning and end of every bed. But actually, some years ago, I started using things like lettuce as basically a living mulch. So any time there's a spot of bare ground, like I might install like maybe a huge row of cabbages, right? 4 feet wide by 60 feet long. But I'm going to use maybe every other, row within that bed of cabbages, maybe I'm putting some chard plants, right? And then also maybe any time there's a bit of bare ground, I'm sticking in a lettuce plant or I'm sprinkling a little bit of lettuce seed. And so I kind of use lettuce as a mulch, and then the lettuce, I'll just we can eat it as we need to. And then it will just make its seed in one season. So it will shoot and bolt and then start to make a flower head. So then I've got bees coming in and I've got butterflies, and all these plants all these pollinators are interested in coming and visiting that. And that's going to help support them. And it's also going to increase pollination for me and other plants that I may need it, right? Like I may want the bees to come and visit pepper plants, right? So that I can get some peppers, or eggplants, right? The flowers, I want them to come and visit those. And if I've got lettuce, which is attracting, going to seed and shooting up a flower head and attracting those pollinators, I'm going to get more to the plants that I actually want. So it's a win-win when you use this polyculture method in your planting. Okay, well, let me check how I'm doing on time. I think pretty good. Oh yeah, great. So I want to save maybe 10 minutes for some Q&A at the end. But so integrated pest management. Now, I think this is an important bit to talk about because things do go wrong in gardens. You are going to have problems that are going to arise. And I think it's important to address, even with beginner gardeners, how to build in pollinator protection to your garden system. And I think IPM is a really great way to do that right from the start. So even if you're new to gardening, this can be something that you can practice. So let's just take a look at this. This is from the Xerces Society, and it just talks about how you might see pesticides moving into the environment. So this is about neonics, right? So this is helpful in understanding how this moves throughout our environment to help understand how we what kind of products we might choose to put on our garden. So, and this isn't a commercial setting, but it's similar with if you're doing it in your backyard garden. So dust, right? So this is that seed coating. Dust can be released from coated seeds, can contaminate non-target sites or expose bees. So if I'm spraying something, spray drift is another one, right? Like maybe you're spraying it on one plant, but it's drifting off into nearby non-target sites. So something like in a systemic chemical, right? The plants take up those, like they take them up into their plant tissue, and that allows the chemical to spread through the tissue and potentially then exposing insects that eat pollen, nectar, and other plant tissue. It's not doesn't just stay on the ground or doesn't just stay on the leaves when you spray it. It's something that is throughout the entire plant's tissue. Many chemicals, and particularly neonics, are long-lived, right? As they can persist in the environment for months to years after an application. This is something to consider when starting a garden in a new space that is new to you. If you are a new homeowner or you're a renter and you don't know what was applied before, I would highly recommend using that no-till method and doing a lasagna bed on top of the soil, because it could really be possible if you tilled and did an in-ground garden, that there was some kind of pesticide applied and would actually inhibit your plant growth or might inhibit your ability to attract pollinators, that kind of thing. So maybe just cover it up, right? Just like put the cardboard down and start layering it up, and that allows you to at least have a barrier there. Neonics and other chemicals, pesticides can also leach into the subsurface water, so they can enter groundwater and also then be taken up by neighboring plants, can contaminate watersheds, moves into the habitat of ground nesting insects. So 70% of native bees are ground nesting. So this is something that it can becomes very, very critical. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at the next one. So integrated pest management is an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. So basically, when we're looking at this, again, this is such a huge topic. We're looking at acceptable pest levels. We're real used to plants or food in our grocery store looking perfect. If I was to go into the grocery store and purchase some collard greens, I expect the collard greens to look pretty nice. I don't really expect them to be riddled with holes, right? But if there were some holes in my homegrown produce, it really wouldn't actually affect my ability to eat it, right? So with all plants, there might be an acceptable pest level, right? A few holes in the kale, not a big deal. But maybe if the pest or something is like decimating the plant and I risk losing the entire crop, okay, then it's crossed that threshold. So you can use preventative cultural practices, you can use monitoring, mechanical controls, biological controls, and responsible use of pesticides. I think a lot of even people in like the organic food movement, or certainly like the Pollinators Stewardship Council. I think sometimes folks get a bad rap about being anti like agriculture. And we all need food. We all need food. I think it's I think the issue is that not that people are against agriculture, but really just wanting to find a way that that we can produce the food that we need in a way that is supportive to soil health and animals and pollinators and all kinds of things. So being really responsible if you are going to use pesticides, what that actually looks like. So here is a little infographic that can be really useful. So, because this is, I think, kind of explains it nicely. So first, this is a picture of like an apple tree. So maybe this is like a codling moth or something, or apple maggot. So you would identify and monitor it. So one thing, if you're not sure what kind of pest is bothering your plants, most people are going to live in an area where they have a master gardener program through their local cooperative extension office. Master gardener plant clinics can be an incredible resource. And this is going to vary somewhat county to county. In our county where I live, it's fantastic. During the growing season, they have 2 plant clinics a week that you can go in and bring a sample of this leaf that's getting eaten and bring it in. And if you're not able to attend at the time that the plant clinic happens, you can just drop it off. They'll look at the sample, they'll tell you what's going on with it, and you can say, oh, I want to treat it in an organic, way, and so they'll give you some strategies. So this can be I would really, really strongly recommend checking out your master gardener plant clinic if there's one in your area to help you identify and monitor what's going on. So then you evaluate it, right? Like, is the pest causing the damage? So this is a good example in my situation, we didn't have for years we didn't have any problem with apple maggot or codling moth in our apples. We have about 80 apple trees and never had a problem. And then one year we just started having a problem, and we have had a problem ever since. And so what is causing it? And then do we need to act? And in our situation with this exact thing, we did need to act immediately. It was absolutely devastating to our apple crop. With the example of the holes in the kale, not so devastating, right? Like I could just like kind of deal with that. We have flea beetles and those are eating some holes in the kale, and it's like not that big of a deal. So there's a tipping point for folks, and it's really going to depend on your own situation, what that tipping point is. But so is the pest causing damage? Do you need to act? And then as the pest numbers increase, you may need to do some more treatment. So there's a lot of preventative things that can happen. Rotating crops, that polyculture, using resistant plants, not things that are necessarily like genetically modified, but there's lots of like plants that are maybe resistant to certain types of diseases just naturally. And so when you look in a plant catalog, if you have a problem with, rust in your beans and your bush beans, then choose a variety that's naturally resistant to that, right? There's also all kinds of prevention things that can happen that are not about chemicals. So in this example of like apple maggot in our area, there aren't a lot of organic sprays. Even if I wanted to spray something, there aren't a lot of organic options. One of them is this clay that you spray, and it will kind of coat the apple. You're supposed to coat the apple with this, and you do these applications regularly because when it rains, you have to reapply. Well, it's Pacific Northwest, it rains a lot. And so that was not something that we really wanted to do. So what we found was this may sound silly to some of you, but we sock all apples. So we have these they're kind of like pantyhose, these little socks that you would use at like a shoe store. And we tie those onto thousands of apples at a certain stage when they're a little smaller than a walnut. And that's great. It's that's all we had to do. We don't have to spray any chemicals. It actually goes really fast once you know how to do it, and it can be this really great way to prevent pests. And it's not it's not waiting till the end. It's not applying a toxic chemical. And you just want it so you can take action and you can kind of monitor. And there's all different ways and areas that you can practice integrated pest management. So this is something that is could be really, really useful in your gardening practice. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly here. So reading the label is important. Both of these products look like they are organic. In fact, some of them, like this one says organics right in the name. These are not organic products. It can be really challenging to determine what is organic and what is not, even if you are interested in using an organic product. So one way to really be able to tell is to look for the OMRI symbol to ensure organic certification. You can also look on the OMRI website. There's a search function, so you can look up different products. You can also contact the manufacturer for information. Not all things that are on the OMRI list that are actually certified have this little label. So sometimes if you're just not sure, it's totally worth checking out the website. But for the most part, that OMRI certification will be on products that are certified organic. But one thing I think is really, really important to know is that organic pesticides are still pesticides. So I have these pictures of two products that both contain pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is a compound made from chrysanthemum flower, so it's organic, right? Because it comes from a flower. Pyrethrin affects an insect's nervous system through a toxic effect. So it's really effective. Kills a wide range of insects, including ants, mosquitoes, moths, flies, and fleas, and will also kill beneficial insects such as bees. So you can have organic or non-organic pyrethrin. So on the left, we have this Bug Buster O. It's OMRI certified. You can see the little label there. It contains 1.4% pyrethrin or something. And this is, you apply it, and then we have the pyrethrin shampoo, and this for dogs and cats, and it's like flea shampoo or whatever, and it has a similar amount quantity, and it's not organic, it's not OMRI certified, but both of these will kill bees. So it's really important to pay attention to that and to note. And I've got a link to a site that will help you have a good sense of what the problems might be and how to avoid that. Okay, so oops, wrong way, sorry. And then let's take a look here. So I want to talk about the Pollinator Stewardship Council just really briefly and what we do. So one of the things is that we want to we do legal and legislative advocacy on behalf of pollinators. So one thing that I did not know, even though I felt like I was pretty involved with the organic food movement, is that in the US, pesticide manufacturers self-test their own products with no peer review, and they submit that directly to the EPA for registration. I was totally unaware of this. I feel like I was very innocent in thinking like, oh, if I wanted to develop a pesticide, a third party, an objective organization or the EPA would, of course, have to test that because if I was manufacturing, of course, I would want to create testing that showed that it was safe. So it seemed like a conflict of interest, right? So that is one of the very things that we and many other groups have been working on for years, is to try to change some of those regulations that would require, a different way for us to register products. Pesticide manufacturer claims are often proven untrue, so they will get registered, and it's very, very challenging to get them taken off of the market once they're on. And so there's all kinds of, tons of information about this, particularly like neonics. There's like, just an incredible number of scientific studies from all different regions of the world showing that neonics, are damaging to pollinators. When they were first coming out, the industry asserted that they were only capable of limited systemic movement within the plant, and they wouldn't be capable of moving into nectar and pollen. And that's totally been disproven. Crop yields would decrease dramatically. We hear this a lot if neonics were banned. And chemical companies will say that, we won't be able to grow food, but then after banning in Quebec and the European Union, crop yields remained consistent or increased without the use of neonics. So we try to we like real science. We we're very interested in looking at scientific studies. We have some great people on our scientific advisory committee to help us look at the science and then figure out how can we help support pollinators and change the regulatory process. And we learned about this, right? 48 times more toxic to insect life than it was 20 years ago. Just gonna move through this really quick because we have just a few more minutes. So different ways that you can support, in addition to growing your awesome garden that you're going to be working on and planting flowers and that kind of thing. You can also become a member or donate with Pollinator Stewardship Council. Um, you can also help educate. So sharing on social media, sharing our posts. On our website, there's tons of different articles. There's a education list. So if you wanted to share, we've got all kinds of like social media posts and different things that you can just download and then share out on social media or print, whatever you like. We're also in the process of developing a series of educational like handouts, print materials that we are going to be able, we have got some terrific grant funding and we're going to be able to share those out at no charge. And so I believe in June, we should have those available on our website. You can just request. So if you're part of a garden organization, there'll be one on, how to support bees in a backyard garden, right? And so you can share those materials out, the print materials with folks in your organization. So those should be available in June, which I'm pretty excited about. So I'm going to come back to this page in a second, but there's a QR code here for becoming a member. I'm going to stop. Oh, actually, I'll go one more. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing briefly so that I can copy these things into the chat for you. So let's see here. I'm going to put a couple of resources just really quickly. Okay, so these resources that I've just put in the chat, there's the Seed Ambassadors one is this great zine publication. It's kind of old now, but it's you can print it out. It's a great intro to seed saving, and it covers just really basic crops that a lot of backyard gardeners might grow. And so you don't, I think this is a great introduction. You don't have to purchase a book or that kind of thing. This can be a really good one. Charles Dowding is this hilarious character from the UK who does no-till garden method. And he's just got a lot of like free videos and resources that are really useful. And he has a YouTube channel and all kinds of stuff. And so that might be a good way if you are interested in learning more about no-till garden methods. And then this Beyond Pesticides document is a list of different pesticides that might affect pollinators. It's can be a really good resource for that. Let me share another thing real quick. Okay, so there's also I had mentioned, hold on, I'm gonna try one more time. I've got to put this in a couple of different messages. So today I had mentioned that we're trying to work on regulatory changes. So one of the changes that we are wanting to impact is that seed coating that I mentioned. And so I'm putting some sample language. If you're interested in submitting a comment, I would ask you to change this because if we have the same message every time the EPA won't count it as individual comments. So you want to customize this. But here is basically some text kind of explaining our premise here and our position. So if you share that interest, then you could write in support of that. Okay. So I'm going to go into questions now. Okay, great. So we have great. We have some beekeepers and organic gardeners. Awesome. Oh, native plant enthusiasts. That's great. Yeah, native plants are, I think there is definitely a balance. We'd like to, I like to grow tomatoes and the Pacific Northwest. They're definitely not native plants, but we do quite a lot of native plant and forest restoration in our area too. Super important to have both. Gardener that hosts one local beekeeper's hive. Cool, cool. Master gardener. Oh, great. And so, yeah, I'm curious, Anthony, if in your region, do the master gardeners do plant clinics? If you want to unmute yourself or just type it in, I'm curious about that. Let's see here. Oh, great. So everybody, it looks like most people are most people are beekeepers, which is pretty cool. Let's see. In the past, at the recommendation of arborists, I've used neonics to systematically control and prevent increase of scale on ash tree on my property. Okay, great. So Kathleen, I'm also just going to put I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And what I would love is if you could just message that to me and I will find that information for you. And Anthony looks like has a great oh yeah, perfect. I love when I love master gardeners. Yeah, so looks like he's listed some things for 2 different extension websites. Great. So if you need more information, Kathleen, if you want to reach out to me via email, this is not the one that's listed on the Pollinators Stewardship Council website. I find that email sometimes gets filtered out as junk when I'm replying to people's messages. So this one is just my personal one, and you're welcome to contact me with that. Another question was, what do you suggest for keeping mulch in place in areas that regularly have high winds? And so the high winds situation is I would probably try to, because we've had that problem a little bit before, you know, I would probably focus more on using like initially green mulches. So if you grew a cover crop and then cut it down and kind of, we use the chop and drop method, like anytime we weed or anything, we just like leave it where it lays, right? So that's less likely to be picked up by the wind. And then by the time that it decomposes and the wind might pick it up and bring it, it's kind of settled in. That's different than applying like a bunch of dry straw on your garden, right? Then the wind is just going to pick that up really easily. So I guess in that situation, I would, for one, suggest using more of a green than a brown mulch initially. Another thing is that part of the no-till method for us is tarping. And so we will tarp with those different types of materials you can use for tarping at different times of the year to help decompose a bunch of the mulch and move it, kill any weeds and that kind of thing. And so you might, depending on what application you want the mulch for, you might want to use tarping. That might also help. If you're using mulch in a perennial garden, it's great to use, wood chips or that kind of thing. But if you are digging into the garden, you want to generally avoid the use of a heavy thing like wood chips. How do you find cardboard that has not been made from and treated with chemicals? That is a really great question. I find that you can, I think generally speaking, you can use cardboard in organic systems, but if you're concerned, we used to raid the bin of our natural foods co-op, the recycling bin. We don't use a ton of cardboard these days, but we used to use quite a lot of it. And so we would just pull up a truck and load in there. And we found that most of those products use things like soy ink or just different things that were a little bit more environmentally friendly. So yeah, we stopped using so much cardboard because even though it was free and it was great to reuse it, we live in a rural area, so we had to like move it in and transport it. So we find that actually just different kinds of mulch and then tarping seem to work pretty good for us. If you don't want to do that layer that I talked about with the like the lasagna bed gardening, you don't have to put cardboard down on the bottom. It's a great one because it can be that barrier. But if you are wanting to, start with a lawn and you just want to kill the grass. Again, that tarping can work. You could just lay that down initially for, 6 weeks or so. Even a few weeks is going to help, but you could lay it down for like 6 weeks, kill a section of whatever is growing there, and then layer up on top of there. You could also layer up, if you layer up thickly enough, then probably, you wouldn't need to use cardboard. You could use thick layers of other kinds of mulch. Let's see here. I think Oh, we do plant clinics and ask a master gardener booth at the farmers market. Yeah, great. That's same as in our county. It's a really just fantastic resource, and I think people who use them love them, and I think not as many people use them as should. So they can be just a really, really fantastic group of folks. Okay, well, I hope that was useful. I appreciate everybody attending today. And let's see here. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is in there. You can also reach me at the Pollinators Stewardship Council email that's listed on the website. I really encourage you to go through and to look at some of those resources we have in the education section, because there are a lot of things that are little infographics about how to support pollinators in your garden or that kind of thing, or posts that you can share on social media. Sometimes there are also some infographics or a little series about how to talk to your neighbors about use of pesticides, and how to kind of, if you're a new beekeeper, how do you have those, how do you, some neighborhoods don't want to have bees and that kind of thing. So how do you have those conversations? So anyway, might be of interest. So again, I appreciate everybody's time and I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.